Hello and welcome back to Azure Terraformer. Today I have a code review from one of our very own code ninjas, dankitch. Today we're looking at some Terraform that looks like it was pulled out of an Azure DevOps repo that has conditional access policies and uses the Azure Active Directory provider. So join me and let's do this code review together. So first thing, I see these usual suspects. These look like my little buddies, my little pipelines, or a version of them. It looks like he's added validate to them, which is, I think, a good improvement. I need to go back and add some additional quality checks into these pipelines. Yeah, so these are the usual suspects. One of the great things about the multi-stage pipeline is that you can add manual approval steps between plan and apply to make sure that somebody reviewed the plan and is cool with it before it goes in. So I assume he's using the multi-stage version, and these other pipelines are mainly for back-end stuff. I did notice that he is using an older version of my bash script that has individual bash parameters, $1, $2, $3. My bash expert that I consult anytime I have bash questions, besides ChatGPT, told me there's a better way using $, which will pull in all the arguments. So you can see up here, these arguments that we pass into this bash script basically create multiple arguments that get added. This would be $1, this would be $2, this would be $3. So using $* would allow us to be flexible enough to support n number of arguments, and they would all get loaded in and they would all get passed into Terraform. Now this won't work if you want to use some of the arguments for other things that are happening in the script, but pretty much all these arguments are going to go and inform the Terraform command execution. And so in that case, using $* will allow us to add additional var files, right? One solution that I built, we had a shared infrastructure environment that had a TFR file that had just the environment variables for the shared infrastructure environment that we were targeting. And so we would have that var file, and we would have another var file that was just like the specific deployment settings. So we could stamp out multiple instances of the environment within that shared infrastructure. And we could maintain multiple environments inside multiple instances of the shared infrastructure. So having that $* gave us that flexibility. So GIgnore. See, this is how thorough I am. I even review people's GIgnore files, okay? Thorough or anal retentive or whatever you want to call it. So he has TFR files excluded here. I never just carte blanche exclude TFR files. And the reason why is that I think it's okay to have TFR files in your source code. And in fact, it's a good thing. It breeds reusability of that config. And it should build some muscle memory that TFR files are not where secrets should go. Secrets should never go in TFR files. Now I say that I'm about to break my own rule. So secrets get piped in through your pipelining tool, either Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, whatever. It's that way they can come from a secure location. But what happens when you want to run locally? And again, I just said never put secrets in TFR files. I'm about to undo that with a big but. But when you want to run locally, it's not super convenient. So you need, sometimes to have a TFR file that has secrets in there. Otherwise, you're going to bork your environment. So in a break glass moment, if you're deving locally in a dev environment, you can create a TFR file, a very, very special TFR file that you can put secrets into. And I do this so that I can run locally and I don't bork the environment. I can run Terraform plan, I can run Terraform apply, I can do all the things. And I just make sure that those secrets are isolated into a special TFR file that I do include in my GIgnore. And my convention is I call that .debug.tfrs. And that basically stands out to me as a very scary file. Anything that starts with .debug should not be going into source code ever. So that's where I put all the secrets, and I make sure that in my GIgnore file, anything / .debug.tfrs is excluded from source control always. So I feel like this is a good compromise, because there is a very valid use case for long-lived environments that you want to have the configuration of those environments, like the SKU, the node count, different attributes that are absolutely not sensitive, right? But you want to know if somebody changes those. So if you put those into a pipeline variable in Azure DevOps, somebody can go and change that pipeline variable and you won't know it, right? And so having that stuff all stored in a TFR file, that important configuration of your code base is under source control management and goes through a pull request process, which I would argue, if you're going to change the SKU from an E16 to an E128, you probably want to have a pull request review to make sure that that's actually done with intent. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money, right? So one of my pet peeves is commented out code. I used to not care about this as much, but somebody explained it to me one time and it made a lot of sense. Number one, Git and a source control management software, which Git is one instance of, keeps a history of the code and the changes that you make to your code. So if this particular block of code was meaningful at one point in time and then transitioned to cease to be meaningful, you would go in and delete it and make a commit and it would be gone. Now you can go back in time using the Git commit history to go find like that block of code if you ever needed it. So it's always going to be there. But it's if you leave it commented out, when a code reviewer is going to go look at that code, they're going to be like, why are you doing that? Why is this here? Number one, it's going to spark a question in the mind of the code reviewer. Number two, it's going to spark the question in the mind of a future author. Let's say the code reviewer lets you commit that code and merge that into main. Somebody else comes and tries to do a pull request on top of your code. They're going to see that commented out code. They're going to be like, is this like intentional? Should this be uncommented out? Like, why is this commented out? And so it causes confusion and unnecessary cycles to be created for that. When you work on a team, or even when you're working on a team of one, you come back later and you're like, why did I do that? Why is that commented out? Why is that there? Is this important? It causes doubt and it causes confusion, and it will cause delays, because then you'll have to go around and figure out, like, is this meaningful at all? And if you commented it out, it's probably not meaningful. So try and avoid the practice of leaving commented out code in there. Now I get down here and I ask the question, I see a lot of these on this block of these conditional access policies, like included groups, included users, commented out. So I'm wondering, why are we leaving that in there? Is that to save somebody the ability to look up, the schema for this block in the future? Or do we actually think that there's a high likelihood that somebody's going to come in here and add an included group, or add an excluded user, add an excluded location? So I would, if it doesn't hurt the behavior, right, and you do want to leave that in there as an empty array, then just uncomment it out. And then, a commented out empty array is the same thing as an uncommented out empty array. So just leave it in there as, not commented out, and be like, yeah, here I am. I'm an empty array. If you want to add something to this array, go for it. But I want you to know, future author, that I purposefully and explicitly left this array empty. It's not like I commented out because I was afraid I might break something. So I commented it out, right? So again, commented out code always causes questions about why is it commented out? If I uncomment this, if I use this, is this going to break something? So if it doesn't hurt anything and you want to leave it there to save somebody the lookup to RTFM, like what the schema is for this user's block, just uncomment it out and leave it there, and always be explicit. So there's that. Okay, so we've got CA01, CA02, and I noticed these naming conventions, and good Lord, I am a stickler when it comes to naming conventions. If you follow my channel at all, you'll notice I'm a bit on the anal retentive side when it comes to naming conventions. And I have my way of doing it, and everybody has their own. And generally, for the most part, I think, let bygones be bygones. If you have a naming convention like that you use and you like it and your organization likes it, stick to that. Like, just whatever your naming convention is, do it consistently. That's all that I would ask. Now, this is a code review, so I'm going to give my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion, and I formulated this opinion for reasons. Like, I don't just make this stuff up, right? So I'll explain my reasons. So the naming convention that I use for variables and object reference names in Terraform, now CA002, I could give it a pass because, it doesn't have any symbols in there, and it is all caps. But I prefer not to, and so I guess I should formulate this convention as I'd prefer not having mixed case variable names in HCL. All one case or none. So in this case, CA002, it's all caps. Go for it. No problem. In this case, we got capital R and then lowercase o. I would probably stick with a lowercase r and just keep everything all lowercase. I can't tell you how many times, I've been looking at a variable and, it's a capital instead of a lowercase, or a lowercase instead of a capital. And just when you're piping it in, usually, it's not in the Terraform code per se, but usually it's, these input variables. And when you use like the TF_var_ input variable name, it's very, very picky about naming conventions. So to make things super clear, when using different ways of inputting variables into Terraform through the CLI, I've found it a best practice to always use lowercase so that it's distinct and it stands out from the TFR _, environment variable prefix that you need, and to never use hyphens. So hyphens, I don't think are super fun when you're using environment variables, right? I don't even know if it's valid to do that in Bash. Like, can you have an environment variable with a hyphen in it? I don't think so. But you can with underscores. So I would use an underscore for two reasons. The first is, I don't think Bash supports hyphenated environment variables. And even if it does, it's probably frowned upon because I always see them with underscores. And then number two, and this is, you're going to laugh. It's a little nitpicky. This is absolutely a nit. But when you are like piping variables around and even resource block names around, you are inevitably going to double click that name, copy pasta, and paste it, somewhere else and reference an attribute on it, right? So when you put a hyphen in the name, when you double click that object reference or input variable, it's only going to select up to the first hyphen that, for the selection of the text that you selected. It won't select the whole name. So right off the bat, you're going to have to very precisely use a selection tool to select the text. I hate that. So I use underscores as a readability separator so that I can double click a name, copy pasta, and be on my merry way. I want to minimize how many times I have to use the precise selection tool when I try and pick up a variable to reference it somewhere else. Again, This is very nitpicky, but it is a micro optimization from a developer experience at best. So just take that with a grain of salt. So anyways, those are two naming convention things. Don't use mixed case for any resource or variable names. Don't use hyphens, use underscores. Moving on. What do we got here? So again, we've been seeing a lot of these conditional access policies, and they all have the same structure. They've got a conditions block, which has client app types, applications, platforms, users, and session controls. Now, my recommendation here is if you see a certain resource type manifest in, individual or standalone resource blocks that you just stamp out over and over and over again, that's inherently not a terrible thing. It happens. But if there's a common pattern where that resource block is like, we're always setting client app types to all, or we're always setting included applications to like one or more strings, and like the structure, the internal structure of that resource is inherently consistent over and over and over again, then you should absolutely consider using a for each block and defining a local that you declare that the configuration of a multitude of those resource blocks. And then you just iterate across that local collection. This is because when somebody goes and reads that configuration, they can kind of comprehend what's going on much more efficiently by reviewing that locals block to see what the configuration is, rather than looking across these rather verbose stamps of copy-pasted resource blocks, right? This only works, though, if there is a consistent pattern of internal structure within the resource block itself. And so I think there may be some of these in here, but for example, like if some of these use included groups, some of these use included roles, some of these use included users, I'm not going to go and create a locals block that mimics the entire schema of this internal resource, and then like just so that I can put it into a locals block. No. We're not doing that, because that would essentially not get us anywhere. It would just transfer the complexity from the resource block itself into the locals block, and then make me learn the structure of the locals block and navigate that. So you have to make sure that you identify the pattern and keep that pattern very narrow and very You have to make sure you identify that pattern and keep that pattern very narrow and very focused. And if you feel like it's starting to, like the scope is starting to creep around that pattern, then just stop. Just stop and like leave it where it lay. And if you get 3 to 5 with that pattern, then you're fine. And if you need to stamp out individual resources for kind of the edge cases, or if there's a new pattern that kind of manifests with a different structure, then document it that way, right? Create a new locals block with that new structure and stamp out 3 to 5 more of those. Basically, don't use a golden hammer, right? Don't create one locals block that you for each every resource, even though the internal structure of the resource radically changes. Like it's, keep that pattern very narrow. This is something that I catch myself doing as well. Creating these very complex string concatenation things, using complex object structure that I create. In this case, we got a bunch of locals that have a similar structure, policy 5. It's got a sequence number, personas group, cloud app target. Now, I looked and I did not see this referenced anywhere other than when we're creating the strings, right? But we see these locals being declared. So the utility of creating this complex structure, I think, is diminished. So I would much rather just rather than looking at this, these variable inputs, like I don't know what policy 8 sequence number means. Now I have an extra task of going to look that up, right? And so, using kind of indirection, right? Referencing a reusable variable, local in this case, is useful when you use that local variable multiple times, right? Because then it's like, I only declare it one time and I can use it over and over again. But that only really helps. It's only helpful when that piece of data actually needs to be kind of individual, right? Maybe you're going to pipe it into other resources. Maybe you're going to use it in a bunch of different places and you just need that piece of data. But in this case, like we create this complex structure only to stamp out a single attribute, which is the display name. So in this case, I would probably, unless there's other reasons that I have yet to see, I would probably argue for, hey, let's simplify this and let's just like hard code that in the display name, because there's really no difference between hard coding it over here in main and then versus hard coding it right here. The only difference is, as a developer reading this, I don't have to go wonder about what the heck this text resolves to. Like I can just look at it, right? So this is actually a detrimental optimization here. Okay, and I think we're getting to the end here. So here we have some TFR files, which are not checked in, but I think they were included for my review here on GitHub. Now, Azure, I think somebody described it to me. Azure is like the most sophisticated GUID generator on the planet. It's pretty funny, right? But it's true. There's a lot of GUIDs in Azure, and we inevitably are going to work with GUIDs. However, I would recommend trying to avoid like this pattern where you embed a crap load of GUIDs in like a config file. I would much rather use a data source and some human readable value, right, to look it up. And so that may be, and this may not always work depending on the object type and the data integrity of the name attribute that you can use. Like if it's a display name, you probably don't want to base, build your house on top of that, sand. I prefer to use that logical name over an object ID or a GUID. And I'd look that up, because then a human can more easily, like a human operator, can more easily go look up that name and verify that that's the right name, rather than, okay, is it 2 Charlie 0 Echo 7 Delta 6 Delta, or is it 71908 Echo 9 Bravo? It's like, let's make things easier on people. So that would be it. Also, as a convention, I like to put my provider configuration into a special file called versions.tf, just to keep it away from other resources within the solution. I think that creates a little bit of a separation between how to configuring Terraform, which the required providers block and the provider blocks do, and what Terraform is going to go provision. So it seems small, but having a thin layer of glass, so to speak, between that Terraform config and your actual environment config, I think is a good thing conceptually for future authors and other people that are learning Terraform. And then lastly, just consider using the tilde pointer to reference the required version within your root module. In reusable modules, you probably want to use a greater than or equal to a specific version. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's it. Thank you so much, dankitch, for this awesome opportunity to review your code. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And let me know what you think about my feedback. I'm going to go smash the finish your review button here, and we'll see what you have to say. Well, that's it. We finished our first Code Ninja code review. Thank you, dankitch, for submitting your code here and getting me back into the Azure AD provider. Learning lots about conditional access policies today, which was great. If you are interested in code reviews, please open up a pull request on a GitHub repo that's public and submit a request to me. And if you want to be first in line for my code reviews, consider joining the channel as a code ninja. It supports the channel in a tremendous way, and it really helps out a lot. Plus, you'll get me looking at your code so that we can work together on a more regular basis. That's it from me. This is the Azure Terraformer, signing off.